You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Hello everyone, welcome back to episode 218 of Arsenal Pass. Hayden here with Pankaj, Bhojwani as always. This week on the pod, we say goodbye to new and farewell to Part the Misveil as our final Mystic Hero hits or ascends to Living Legend after the Calling win. In the weekend, we're going to talk implications for Classic Constructed. We're going to talk our first Calling with High Seas in Classic Constructed and reminisce a little bit, I'm sure, Pankaj. But first of all, how was your week in Flesh and Blood?
It's been less than stellar, I would say. I think I'm past my Marlin coping. Been brewing a lot with her, been trying a lot with her. We mentioned this a little bit in the Patron pod, or the Patron pre-show rather. There's just a lot of the clunkiness and awkwardness that I brought up last week as well, where a lot of times my resource curve feels like I want 8 resources to do my thing, which is just the super awkward number. Where I want to pitch to a gold to load my harpoon and then pay 6 for cannon plus harpoon, and then that's really weird. Or even big game trophy shot, which is like the majestic that she has access to. It's like it supports an 8 costed resource curve, which just doesn't quite track.
I've got an answer
aside
for you.
from even all that.
What about energy pot? What about energy potion?
Oh yes, of course, the go-to. Yes, let's put an amulet of ignition in there too. Why not, right? Yeah. And you get the 1 extra resource from the gold, and then there you go. There's your 8 resources. So aside from the whole resource curve stuff, it's also the fact that you can go through all the work and then your harpoon just whiffs. Yeah. I'm just like, here's my King Kraken, and then they're like, I'll block with my only non-attack. Or here's my King Shark, and then the Verdant says, I want to discard my fruits and then just have no attacks when this hits. And the thing is, a lot of decks these days, like the Verdances, the Gravies, the Florins, they have these like, they have a good mix of both attacks and non-attacks. So then oftentimes the harpoon just whiffs, or they can block in a way where they make it whiff. Mm-hmm. And when you're against a deck that only has one kind, like for example against the Syndra, well then you only have 2 harpoons that actually do anything. You only have the red fin harpoon and then the King Shark harpoon, and the rest of your deck is just like built around this harpoon mechanic, and you only have 6 relevant ones. So coming back to my week in Flesh and Blood, it's been a bit demoralizing, at least on the Marlin front. I think I need to find a little bit of a different hero. Although I do want to correct you when you said MST has left. I have come around to High Seas having 3 heroes from 3 different sets, actually. I think Puffin is a Bright Lights hero, and Marlin is a Heavy Hitters hero. Puffin's Bright Lights because she does all this spinning wheels, and then she fights to be on rate, and also has a very easy strategy to like just beat her. Just like a dash out is a very linear strategy for the opponent to just like block them out and fatigue them. For Puffin, it's like, oh, you see she has a bunch of cogs, you just don't attack her, and then she doesn't get to refresh them, and then she's dead in the water. Marlin's a Heavy Hitters hero in that she does like big number, and sometimes it's impressive, and sometimes it's just like, okay, cool, it's like a slightly bigger number than average. Mm-hmm. And Gravy is actually an MST hero, because of all the overrated blues that he gets access to, and how he's very blue heavy, and his blues say draw a card on them effectively, his Gogan blues, and he's definitely got that power level. So I don't think we're quite over MST yet.
Okay, well the set specifically is gone. How about that?
Yeah, all right.
My week in Flesh and Blood, I've been testing for Singapore now at this point. Still trying to... Draft is so interesting. I feel like every time I sit down to do like a block of drafts, I feel like my opinion changes on like the ways to approach the format. The meta seems to be shifting within the draft format as well, which is really interesting. This is probably one of the most dynamic draft formats I think we've had, as well as probably the deepest as well. So I'm finding a bit of a struggle to really get a handle on what I want my draft strategies to be heading towards Singapore. So I'm getting to the point now where I'm like, because I'm not playing Nationals this season, which my Nationals will be in 2 weeks' time, I'm now like, okay, maybe I just set aside draft for a little bit, start spending a bit more time on Classic Constructed, and then come back to draft in the final week with like all my ideas and try and see where the draft meta kind of sits post these next 3 weeks of Nationals rather, and make a decision. But I also feel like I want to make sure I get enough drafts in because this format is so interesting. So I think I want to spend a little bit more time drafting this next week and a half, and then I'm going to focus purely on CC. Because then as well we get more information about living legends of heroes and things like that. But I'm in the exploratory phase of CNC in terms of like understanding the power level of decks, what I think is going to have an impact on the format. And I think at this point I'm like, Nu's obviously gone. I think Azalea's definitely gone. Beyond that, I think it's more wide open. And honestly, like I wouldn't even be surprised if Dash IE's not even gone at the end of this. So I'm like, outside of Azalea, like it might be the only hero that actually living legends.
Probably. But yeah, I did want to bring that up, the living legend thing. I think Azalea leaving could have a bit of an impact. So I feel like starting with CC practice now and leaving draft for later might be, I don't know, a little bit.
It's not ideal.
In the reverse direction.
Yeah. Which has been my thought process, like to leave CC until at least the penultimate week of National. So let the penultimate week of National season, and then we'll have a really clear lay of the land for the final week, and then focus on the sort of the 2 week lead up, then into 3 week lead up, then into the Singapore Pro Tour. But yeah, there's time.
Coming back to the draft part of the discussion, and you talking about how your perception is evolving, have you solved Puffin yet in draft?
No.
Okay.
No, but I think I'm
Cool,
further down the road of understanding what good Puffin decks look like and what medium Puffin decks look like, which is helpful. I think basically just to understand that this format has a lot of absolute truths to it to a degree, which I think most draft formats in Flesh and Blood do, in terms of, there's things that are true that you do want to have in your deck. I just think that they're a little bit more varied. You need less of them, I think, in this format than in other formats. So like, for instance, in Part the Mistveil, for instance, which I think is another very good draft format, it's like the types of blues that you had to have in your deck to help you operate with the synergistic strategy of each of the heroes were actually really important, and I think that was just a given. Like, it actually really dictated the power level of your deck. And I think whereas you look at what some of these absolutes are in this limited format, I think they're not as clear cut. Like, okay, how many 3 blocks do you need to have in your format? In your deck. What do your blues need to look like? I think it can vary a little bit, maybe not as much as I thought, but it can definitely vary a little bit. And there are sort of a few different ways to approach each of the heroes. They are subtle differences, I think, but they do make an impact to how you draft and the cards that you ultimately decide to pick. And I think that plays into then, I think in Part the Mistveil, a lot of the cards were just good cards. So it's like people were fighting over very specific blues. Like a Blue Untamed, for instance, in Zen was good in every single Zen deck. It didn't matter. Whereas there's blues in this format, which I think some decks are going to want, even in that hero are going to want, and others will happily take on the wheel. So you need to just understand what that meta looks like, so you make sure that you're wheeling the right cards, that you are taking the right cards in the first picks of the pack, and setting yourself up for success.
A framework that really helped me actually understand that part of the draft format, because I definitely agree with you. There's these different cards where, depending on the deck you are, the value of them definitely changes quite a bit. Simon Nielsen put an article out on the official Fab TCG website. That article, for anyone who hasn't checked that out, anyone who's trying to take this draft format seriously, go read that article, because it is so extremely detailed and so well put together, and it just made me look at this draft format in a very different light that I hadn't quite seen before, and it's helping me understand it a lot better now. He basically separates out the archetypes within each hero as either you are a gold denying archetype, or you're a gold payoff archetype, where your deck is built around generating enough gold and using them as payoffs, or the other one where you're denying the opponent gold. So your 3-for-7 cards are a lot better if you're in the gold denying side of your hero, whereas if you're on the gold enabling side, then your other cards, there's some other cards that get a lot better. So definitely go check the article out. It helped me a lot.
Yeah, I think that article was honestly phenomenal. It is so long, it is so in depth, and shout out to Simon for doing that. Do you know what's crazy to me though, is that despite how massive that article is and how deep he goes in the format, I still think it is somewhat of a simplification of the format in some ways, which is crazy to think. And that's not, to be clear, I'm not saying like Simon is oversimplifying this format, not at all. I think he goes very in depth on, this gold denying and synergistic sort of pieces to the format. But even that's still only a dimension of the format. There's still other things outside of that, and I think those are good banners to the types of decks, but then there's subsets within that and cross subsets as well. And I actually think there's also other approaches. So I think what I love about Flesh and Blood theory and, having pro players in the scene who can discuss theory is that it's now starting to evolve. And like with any theory in any sort of field, you're going to have different views about and different ways of talking about the theory of the game. And I think we're finally getting to a really deep stage with Flesh and Blood, which is awesome. And it coincides with a really fantastic format, I think, and one that it really lends itself to being able to do that.
Definitely agree.
Let's get into the news. Not much to cover this week. I mean, we're still in the very early stages of this new high seas format. No nationals this past weekend, of course, as national season kicks off this coming weekend around the world. I think big ones this weekend. We've got Canada coming up this weekend. I know. Any others on the top of I think Spain might be this weekend as well.
I'm not entirely sure. Canada's the one that I know of for sure because a lot of the testing group is Canadian and they're testing a whole bunch. I'm not sure about
I believe Spain might be this weekend. And Canada is definitely being streamed as well on the Fab TCG YouTube channel, so definitely go check that out. Be very exciting. A lot of, obviously, fantastic players in that part of the world. If we think back to Pro Tour London, of course, 2 Canadian players in Pro Tour top 8 of London from Canada alone, which is actually 3, right? 3, because Leo Vizine as well. So Leo Vizine, Michael Yazka, and Sean Dhaliwal. They put 3 in the last top 8 of a Pro Tour, so definitely check out that Pro Tour this coming weekend. Of course, you've also got players like Yuki as well, and Tarek Patel, so many amazing players that'll be showing up this weekend. I'm sure. Who do you feature round 1? I don't know. Who do you feature round 2? I'm sure all the feature matches will be fantastic. But this past weekend was Calling Bologna, our first look at a calling an open format with Classic Constructed at a Tier 3 event. Of course, US Nationals the previous weekend, heading into Bologna this weekend. People responding to that. We'll talk about the meta breakdown and some of those things in the main topic of the pod. But congratulations to Masu for winning that event from Italy on Nu, sending Nu off to the retirement village with that as well. And, just shout out to the power that is... We spoke about Canada just then, but the power that is different countries within Europe that just continue to show up on, the Flesh and Blood World stage, Tier 3, Tier 4 events. Italy is, a country that's had some players with a few different results. But I think there's just so many different parts of Europe with so many strong players. Look at their neighbours next door in France with players like Arthur Trahay or our Singapore World Premier winner as well. There's just so many players that we're starting to see from different parts of Europe as well. So yeah, shout out to Tommaso on the win.
Did you manage to catch any of the stream of the Calling Bologna?
Yep, a little bit.
Did you see the finals? Because those finals were... They were an absolute nail biter. I was on the edge of my seat. Yeah. The last 5, like 3 to 5 turn cycles, I actually thought the Nu was just dead. I thought the Sinra was winning this easily. And then the Bonds of Agony came out, and it just pivoted, but the Nu is still just fighting on for dear life because she's so low. And then eventually closes it out. It was an amazing game to watch. If anyone hasn't watched it yet, definitely go check that out. It was a fantastic finals and fantastically well casted as well.
Yep. I agree. Yeah, shout out to Scott and Gabe for doing that. Gabe, a friend of mine, another Canadian. There you go. Gabe Scher, who is a Pro Tour top 8 competitor, calling top 8 competitor, very established player at the Tier 4 events, Tier 3 events. Is very, very good at the game. Great to have more players of that caliber calling these games and giving their insight as well. So yeah, well done to both them. You spoke about this article that Simon had posted up on the Fab TCG website. And I want to give a shout out to Legend Story Studios and to the Fab TCG website, because the level up of content that is coming through now on the Fab TCG website is just kind of next level. It really reminds me of some of the flagship websites of TCGs past and present, although I would say it's not as big a factor or focus for a lot of TCGs these days. It reminds me of kind of the heyday of TCG content, written content, in terms of what fabtcg.com is really leaning into at the moment, where you've got some of the best players in the world putting up articles on new heroes, constructed decks, limited formats, but not just from a professional standpoint or a pro player standpoint. You've also got it from the I guess, more casual formats as well. So you've got people putting up, or FabTCG grabbing pillars of the community to publish articles on different formats as well, different ways of approaching the game, things that are a bit more beginner friendly as well. And yeah, I just think the consistency of content that's coming out of there, the quality of the content, means that now I think it's just the destination for written content, which is fantastic.
So the heyday of peak TCG content you're talking about was not when I was part of the TCG community, so I don't really know that part of it, but I definitely do want to echo my appreciation as well. For me in particular, I mean, yeah, we mentioned the competitive articles as well, which are awesome, but I also want to shout out the dev articles they have, the sort of peek behind the curtain, where they talk about how the designs of certain cards evolved through the dev room. I think one of the recent ones was about Arachne Marionette and how their ability changed from throughout the dev process. Like, it actually started with when they were hit, then they flip into a different agent of chaos to get in, like, for the vibe of, oh, you're trying to attack this like shifting shadow mass thing. And how that was like flavorful, but it was like kind of problematic mechanically, and as a Arachne player, that didn't really feel very good because you are losing a lot of agency of like what you're going to do and stuff. So they switched it to what it is now, and just taking a look at the peak behind the curtain and just getting exposed to how much some of these cards evolve from the beginning iterations, both to account for flavor and for mechanical, both to account for both flavor and the mechanical intent or whatever, is very, very fascinating, and I'm a big fan of those articles as well.
Yeah, me too. I just honestly think it's kind of next level, and I think it's so good for the game and for players established and new into this game. Right, let's move on. Commander Cookout. No Commander Cookout question this week. Get your questions in. We actually were looking before and we're like, we don't have any questions that we might have missed some. So if you have submitted a question and it hasn't been read out in the pod, potentially we didn't like the question, I'll be honest with you. But that happens very rarely, I would say. So it's more likely we've missed your question. So if you'd like to resubmit your question, please do so. Or if you've got a new question that you want to ask us, it's definitely a good time to get it on the pod, because we're actively looking for questions for the Commander Cookout section. So if you want to drop them in the YouTube comments below, if you are a video enjoyer of Arsenal Pass, if you're an audio listener, you can actually drop them in Spotify. If you're on Spotify, in the comments there, I will pick those up. You can email us at arsenalpassfab@gmail.com. If you're an Arsenal Pass patron, then you can drop it in the Patreon, the patrons Discord, or you can give us a little handwritten note next time you see us at an event with your question on that note. On that note, Pankaj, I think it's time for us to get into the main topic of the pod and talk about new meta who dis. Although, is this a new meta or is this just a new-less meta? That's the question I have for you.
This is one of those cases which doesn't happen very commonly in the game, but I feel like the LL of new is less impactful than the introduction of a new hero, which we've had this conversation so many times before, where like when Enigma LL'd, for example, you're like, whoa, and then Florence suddenly came in because Enigma's gone, and then Florence the best deck for a while because of Enigma's LLing, and we've had obviously cases of this in the past as well, where the LLing of a hero is typically more impactful.
Yep.
But Gravy coming in, I think, has sort of upturned the boat, so to speak. And I think he's having more of an impact than News LL. But News LL is obviously also going to have a big impact. I'm excited to see where it goes, particularly. I think the first thing that comes to mind is the Guardians, right? Where those, like, people like the Guardians, like Jarl, for example, could play into new, but to do so they sort of had to cut a whole bunch of blues.
Very
so you
different
never
lists.
saw you never saw Jarl like rouse the ancients, for example, because they wouldn't dare put like the not Thunderquake, what's the Glacial Footsteps, or Macho Grandes or whatever in the deck, because new is around.
Or
but now
Thunderquake.
they can do so. Yeah, or Thunderquake. But now they can do so. So how does that change? Of course, like Mastery Pack is coming up, but that's like post Pro Tour. But the first place I'm thinking at is like, are the Gardens allowed to come out and play it now as well?
Yeah, I'm very interested to answer that question, actually. And I think we will talk about maybe I would first of all like to maybe reflect on this calling, because I think in part of talking about the impact of new hitting Living Legend is understanding what that means for national season, which kicks off this weekend. But to understand that, I think we also need to dive into our calling that we had this past weekend to understand a little bit about what is happening with the potential meta now that we have US Nationals in the books. We have this calling now, which is going to give us some insight into what might happen through the next 3 weeks of national season to understand exactly where, those heroes that might benefit from New leaving could start to shine, or those heroes that were kind of hoping that people were going to play New and that New would show up might suffer a little bit. So I thought, let's talk Calling Bologna. Let's first of all talk meta breakdown. Any observations from the meta? The most played deck was a tie, actually, between Azalea and Florian. First of all, Pankaj, any surprises there with those two being the most played, almost represented heroes for Calling Bologna?
I think it indicates the downtrend of Florian, which I will admit I think is actually a little slower than it should be. I just don't think this is a good meta for Florian right now. So I'm surprised to still see him at the top, like tied for most represented. We saw that US Nats, that was expected. But post US Nats, I think it was pretty clear with Verdance and Gravy being at the top that this guy is just not where you want to be. I suppose New still existed, so Florian's fine into that. Actually, no, even less so since Germinate was gone as well. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I would say that's a bit of a surprise. I expected his downturn to maybe be a little bit quicker than that. I don't expect him to be that high. Azalea being most represented is maybe a little bit of a surprise, but I think because of how flat the meta is, it's like I would be similarly like, oh, that's interesting that Azalea was most represented. I would have a similar reaction even if you told me whether it was New or Syndra or Verdance in that like sort of top represented spot because of how flat the meta is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Syndra obviously was heavily represented at US Nationals. The performance of Syndra was pretty dismal at that event, and I think that's a reflection of how many Syndra were played this past weekend, which we'll get into as we get into the sort of the next 5 heroes after these top 2 played. But Azalea, I think, is a pretty easy one for me. It's just the default aggro deck right now, I think. Like, that is where people are at. It got some pretty decent upgrades in high seas, I think, or at least a couple of upgrades that people
got one Swift Shot, right? Like Swift Shot, I think.
That's a pretty good upgrade.
It's a good card. It's a good card. Yeah, it's a good upgrade for sure. Especially if Gravy's running around.
Exactly. Well, yeah. And I think it does obviously have access to play a card like Midas Touch like fairly efficiently, I think, and because it's a yellow resource base still, I think, with a lot of Azalea lists. So I think it has a couple of cards that fit into the deck nicely with what this meta looks like. So Shot plus Midas Touch with what the meta potentially looks like. So I just think it's the default aggro deck. If I talk about Florian, I think it's really interesting because I don't disagree with you in terms of I thought it would have a bit more of a fall off. I am probably a little bit higher on Florian than you are, but I think there's one big point there. You said the top decks being Verdance and Gravy. And I don't think it's reality for a lot of people right now. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm not saying I don't think they aren't 2 of the best decks in the format. I think they are. I think I was pretty clear coming to US Nationals. I thought Verdance was the best deck. You've been very clear about how strong you think Gravy is in terms of what that might do from a meta warping standpoint. We'll talk more about Gravy very shortly. But I think that's not reality not everyone's caught up to that yet, I think. And I think it's going to take at least this first week of Nationals for that to become a reality. And I think for that reason, that's why Florian is where it is. I also actually think Florian got massively neutered, right? The loss of Germinate is huge. It's a very different looking Florian deck without Scepter of Pain to what we saw the ProQuest season. Sorry, for the ProQuest season, right? It's very, very different. In saying that, Earth is still very powerful. Felling of the Crown is still a very good card. The problem for Florian is that the Gravy matchup is abysmal. And believe me, I've tried a few ways for it to potentially be better. It just isn't, because you just can't get your hero ability turned on, because you can't efficiently, you don't get to play an efficient mid-range plan as something like Gravy. You have to be very one-dimensional in how you attack the deck. And you're suffering a little bit in terms of some of the other heroes that have since sort of risen up in place. So I agree on the Florian side. I thought it would be in the top 5, but most played, still probably not, to be honest.
Because I think your New matchup also got worse.
Yes,
actually.
It definitely did.
New,
definitely did.
Post Germinate, I was like, oh, New Florian, I can play this now, and we actually have a game to be played. Yeah. And some of the Florians that went super aggressive leaning, I'm suddenly like, wait, I actually feel maybe even favored in this matchup. If they went deep into the Chalmont heroic stuff, it was they just became a lot more fragile. And they also had more blues that I was happy to play out from the banish as well. Mm-hmm. And they're playing the normal mid-range stuff that's okay, we have a game because you no longer have Germinate.
Yep.
So even that matchup got worse. So yeah, I mean, US Nats already. I was like, ooh, Florian up here. I mean, that one I guess already makes
Florian
sense.
had a good US Nationals though. It had one of the best win rates at US Nationals. Put 2 into top 8. It's not like it had it, and that's kind of what I say is like, yes, I agree with you that I would have expected to drop off a little bit more, but actually looking at results, Florian has still put up good results.
Yeah. I do think that's going to change soon, though, and I do agree. I mean, yeah, like I said, I think the shift is a little slower than expected, but I think it is going to happen. It's going to down 10 a little bit more. Anything else you want to talk about in these top few represented heroes?
No, let's go to Nu because that Nu was the third most played deck, and it's a pretty. You have a bit of a drop off after Azalea and Florian. They were clearly the two most favored decks, but then you have a bit of a group after that. The next 5, which is Nu, Gravy, Syndra, Prism, Verdance, all within 4 copies represented of each other. Very much that next group. They're all around roughly the same percentage of representation. So I think let's just quickly cover off Nu, right? It's gone now. I think partly the amount that showed up was knowing that Nu was probably going to go very soon, partly the fact that it had a more interesting standpoint in the meta. I think, looking at Florian, Azalea, for instance, knowing that Syndra's were going to come out. Verdance has been obviously the winner of US Nationals. I think Nu was a pretty reasonable, in fact, a very reasonable pick for this past weekend. I think, shout out to Tommaso, very strong pick there and a nice list. But now Nu is gone.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. There isn't like anything in this top part of the graph, top part of the hero representation, where as Nu, you're like, oh man, I really don't want to see this. Before it was Florian, but now not anymore. So
yeah.
Up there, I mean, I would put Gravy up there, but again, I think the Gravy lists are still taking some time to coalesce and get to the point where Nu would have been like fully like afraid of it and like realize that that's actually not a good matchup. But I think for that early meta, it's like, yeah, you're fine playing into like a lot of the Gravies and everything else on the top 7 represented. You're like, you know what? You have a game to be played, and then you can skill gap or just be a good Mystic hero.
Let's talk Syndra first. We'll come back to Gravy because Syndra was one of the most represented heroes. Was it the most represented at US Nationals? I have to go back to my notes.
It was the second. It was right after Florian.
Right after Florian.
Yeah. Well, not right after Florian. There was a bit of a drop off.
Yeah.
Like Florian was like 65 or something like this, and then Syndra was like a 47 or something. But she was second most represented.
Yeah, and you had called that in our preview for US Nationals that you thought Syndra would have representation. You thought it was a potentially reasonable pick that people would land on it. I obviously was like, don't know why you'd play Syndra, and I think obviously in this instance was kind of proven right to a degree. But I actually think Syndra over the next couple of weeks is in a much better position because I think it's the natural predator of Gravy. I think it's the deck that people are first going to look towards to tackle Gravy, and I think for good reason. And honestly, I think some of the other meta spread that's going to show up for you, it's going to shift more in Syndra's favor, I think. So whereas in the past I would definitely poo-pooing Syndra and saying I don't know why anyone would register this hero, and I feel a little bit vindicated looking at the US Nationals results, I do think it becomes a much more viable pick in these Nationals weeks.
Yeah, so my prediction for Syndra for US Nats was, again, I was expecting the meta to have moved on a little bit faster than it actually did, like even for Bologna, for example. But I think Bologna is starting to show the trend towards, maybe Syndra 100%. Is actually a player in this metagame. I mean, she made the finals, and she had a much better performance at Bologna compared to US Nationals.
Yeah, and I think it's worth pointing out, when we say this kind of meta move on, it's just about how people adapt. Like Calling is an open format, for instance. I think you're going to see the best players at these events. Again, Tommaso taking that out, our Polish player on Syndra in the finals. You're seeing these players, and there's a few names in that top 8 as well that I recognize. You're seeing these players more at the top of the field who probably adapt a little bit quicker, but also understand that it's an open format. There's going to be a fairly wide spread of meta. You have to be ready to play against almost anything when you've got 30 plus heroes in a meta. So yes, I think meta move on. I think naturally when you get to a national season, you see it move on a little bit because it's especially at these bigger events because of invite-only events. And then we head to Pro Tour Singapore, of course. Pro Tours are always narrower meta games than Callings, where they're just more open formats. So yeah, just want to point that out. It's not a case of like, oh, what are people doing? Why are they slow to react? Not at all. I think it just, it does take time for everyone to react, but those players at the top of the game, those players who are more in tune, those players who are, your regular players that you're seeing on these circuits, they are the ones that tend to adapt first, and then the meta kind of follows from there.
Oh yeah, for sure. I was not dissing
No, me either.
the entire competitive play. I'd be like,
I just
it's so slow. But yeah,
I just want to make that clear that we don't stand with some other comments that people make out there on social media and different other.
I'm not sure what comments you're referring to. Like, were there comments of people being like, "Oh man, this"? Oh, I guess I'm sure there's always comments like, "Oh, that player base is soft" or whatever. Like that happens every single time. Is that what you're referring to? Because I haven't been exposed to them, but it sounds like that's a sort of.
I'm not going to say anymore. I don't think any more needs to be said. Okay. I think everyone's really clear where Arsenal Pass stand, which is that we think that every part of the world has phenomenal players who show up and shell out. To be honest. All out.
Sounds good. All right. Should we talk about Gravy finally?
No, let's leave Gravy to last.
No, not yet.
Let's talk about Verdance, because Verdance was the US Nationals winner in the hands of Marjan Bay the previous weekend. Comes into this format, hot streak, one of the best performing decks of that weekend as well in terms of win percentage. Is the 7th most represented deck, which is not surprising to me because I think Verdance is a little bit intimidating. I think Wizards can just naturally be a little bit intimidating in terms of picking it up and playing it without maybe the reps or understanding how to pilot the hero. What I think is interesting though is I looked at looking at Marjan's list, for instance. It's more of a value based Verdance deck, so I thought more people might have adopted that list in particular, and I thought it might be at an event like this maybe the 4th or 5th most played. So that was a little bit interesting to me, but it's still in that higher number of represented group with New Gravy, Syndra, Prism. It's just the least of those next 5.
I think a big part is that New still existed, and if you're looking at these like top 7 most represented decks, the New Verdance matchup is the one that's the most one-sided out of any other pair they can come up with here. I mean, except again, not count like Gravy is a little bit weird, where it's like I think it's going to become more one-sided as Gravy lists get more refined. But for now, at least, it definitely felt like the New Verdance matchup was most one-sided out of these like top 7 most represented. Like your Florian, Prism, whatever. It's like like both you get to play a game on both sides and stuff. So that maybe also is another thing that was deterring people from playing Verdance.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
Well be the case.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. Prism. What do you think about Prism?
I think with Gravy coming up, and if Syndra is the hero of choice for people to combat Gravy, then Prism stock definitely rises as well. Prism Gravy has some elements of the Prism Dromai matchup back in the day, where at first it was like, oh man, Dromai just wins every time, and then Prisms realized, wait, every time they resolve an ally, that's a free Herald hit. It's a free soul, it's a free figment, and all that kind of stuff. Granted, at that time, they had Tome of Divinity and the ALS
very
loop,
different,
which they don't have anymore. So it's worse than before, but it has elements of that where you do get the free on hits because Gravy is resolving board state. So I think there's a game to be played there, and like Prism's very viable into that. And if people want to bring Syndra to try and counter Gravy, then Prism's happy with that matchup as well.
Yeah. I think with Prism, the matchup spread looks fairly good for Prism, I think, heading into this national season. So I think it's a very, very viable pick, a very potentially strong pick. My one concern with Prism is just naturally how strong is the deck. 32 life. You've lost a lot of things with Tome of Divinity, in terms of having access to a much easier loop setup or repeatable in-game setup. You don't have that as much anymore. You still, of course, have, like you spoke about last week, you've still got Halo, Erudition, ALS plays, right, which are still really nice sort of game states that you can work towards. But yeah, I have some questions about Prism, but I also think it's definitely going to be one of the better picks, I think.
I expect it to rise, but then I expect it to decline a little bit as well, because I actually don't think Syndra is the Gravy counter. Like I think the Syndra Gravy matchup, it reminds me a little bit of Aurora Enigma, where at first you're like, oh, Aurora's beating up Enigma every time, and then as the meta evolves, as the Enigma lists get adapted, suddenly Enigma Aurora was absolutely a game to be played, and Aurora's not necessarily feeling super favored in that matchup anymore. Not even feeling favored at all, actually. And I expect Syndra Gravy to go that way as well. I think eventually it's going to come out that Gravy can just play a fine big number value game into Syndra.
See that being very, very true. Let's talk about Gravy then. It was the 4th most represented deck of the weekend. Did you expect it to be more represented, maybe still less represented? Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I expect it to go up. I expect it to go up, and I expect the list to also evolve a little bit more in a very, very similar way that we've seen illusionists evolve in the past. Dromai came out, everyone's trying to play all the dragons, including all the 3 big ones, and they just fall behind on value because the allies can get clunky and everything. And then Dromai moved towards actually playing more 0-4-4s and having allies as like a supplement to like that sort of value-based strategy. And then suddenly she is just incredibly strong and it's very difficult to deal with. Enigma, same thing. She comes out, everyone's jamming 3 Waning Vengeance, 3 Waxing Spectres, and anything that says Ward on it. Even freaking Enchanting Melody, right? They're like, oh, we're going to play this and it's going to be good. And it turns out that's not the way to go. You just have a few board state pieces, you have your strong ones, and then you Phantasmaclasm people. And I expect Gravy to evolve that way as well. So in that vein, I expect his matchup into aggro to get better, and I just expect his representation to go up. I do think he's shaping up to be the Enigma of this meta.
So for Bologna, about what you expected, though?
Yeah. For Bologna, it makes sense.
Let's chat conversion rates, because I think, representation is one thing, and that tells you a point in time, right, of how people are feeling about the format. But I think conversion tells you a little bit more about performance, right, especially in a constructed-only event, and of course top 8, which we'll talk about. Nu had the best, I think, scanning this conversion, which is, like we said, I think not surprised that people picked it up. Great pick for the weekend. Of course, you can't make that pick again for a classic constructed event, but had a very good conversion rate there at 45%. The second best, though, was actually Victor at 43%. Not heaps of copies of Victor in the event. It was, outside the top 10 most played decks, but had, very good conversion rate all the same.
Yeah, that's actually very interesting. I didn't even notice that because I was focusing on Syndra having the sort of the second most day 2 representation, which is a pretty big jump from being 5th most represented on day 1. And it's a way better performance compared to US Nationals, where she was second most represented and absolutely fell off a cliff for day 2. But for
Syndra players can't draft, apparently.
But yeah, for Bologna, it was the reverse. So
yeah, I think also very interesting. If you look at the underperformers and overperformers, so Gravy was about the same spot, sort of landed in the same spot, which makes sense to your point about strong, but maybe we're still working it out. Or some people still working out. Maybe there's still things to understand. Syndra obviously rose significantly to become the second most represented on day 2. Nu was the most represented, like we spoke about. Verdant's had a big jump though. Went from the 7th most represented deck to the 3rd most represented deck on day 2. A nice 30% conversion rate. So I think still continuing to show the strength of Earth, and right now the strength of Earth in a Wizard shell as opposed to a Runeblade shell, where Florian was a drop off from the most represented deck or equal most represented deck to just 6 copies making day 2, 17% conversion rate. But Azalea was a worse conversion rate even still at just 14%.
Yeah, Azalea did not have a good weekend. The Verdant's piece is interesting because if you look next to her, she's surrounded by Nu, Syndra, and Gravy as like the other best, like the most represented decks on day 2, and those aren't like great matchups for Verdant. Like Nu isn't a good matchup, Gravy isn't a good matchup, Syndra is like you get to play a game, but it's not amazing either.
Yeah.
So seeing her still perform that well despite that is pretty surprising, pretty interesting. I wonder if it goes back to what we were talking about Verdant as a deck potentially being slightly intimidating, and so the people who are playing her are the ones who are extremely, extremely comfortable and practiced on the deck, and maybe that there's a little bit of selection bias happening there. I'll put Prism in a similar category where I feel like Prism's a sort of hero where when I face a player on Prism, there's already a level of, you're not someone who just picked up the deck. Like you have some level of experience and some level of knowledge of this deck, which is why you're comfortable enough to bring this fairly intricate hero over here. Azalea, though, having such a terrible representation, I don't know, maybe she just ran into all the Florians, and a lot of them ran into Florians and News. I mean, yeah, second and third most represented were Florian and News. Neither of them are good matchups for Azalea, right? So
yeah, makes sense. Okay, just a couple other shout outs I want to make and get your thoughts on, and it's going to lead us nicely into the top 8, I think. But the first one is Kano, 40% conversion into day 2, being I believe the 10th most played deck on the first day, or the 9th most played deck on the first day of the competition. Stayed around that 8th mark, but a very good conversion from one of the heroes that had it's like this group of Azalea Florian were the two most played decks, and then it was like a next group of those 5 we spoke about: Nu, Gravy, Syndra, Prism, Verdance, and then it's like Arachne's there, Arachne, Marionette, and then it's a real drop off into Kano, Puffin, Kasai, etc. But Kano a very good conversion rate there at 40%, and yeah, quite strong.
Yeah. I mean, again, like if you look at the top of the metagame, like top of the representation, like Florian's and News, like yeah, Kano's happy to play into those. Gravy as well. That's an interesting matchup. I do wonder how it's going to evolve. At least for now, if the Gravies are still being very, very ally focused and less go again big attack focused, where they can't output enough pressure fast enough, then I could see Kano being okay there. Syndra and Azalea definitely aren't super great though. But yeah, I think Kano was like a fine pick, like similar to Prism, where it's like, you know what, this is a fine pick.
Yeah, nothing's worse than, apart from Prism, nothing here is worse than like 45%-ish for you. So like, you know, Kanos can win against all these decks above it in day 2, except for, you know, Prism is an abysmal matchup.
Prism's the 10%, yeah, for sure.
But
Burn Bear was not good enough to...
No, gave you an extra 5% maybe. So what I'm actually interested in is, the one thing I think about Flesh and Blood a lot is, we talk about adapting to formats, adapting to decks and strategies that rise. And I think one thing that usually happens is that we punch up in this game, right? So the heroes at maybe a mid representation adapt to decks at a higher representation. What you generally find is that the decks that are at a higher representation or more widely adopted and seeing play as maybe top decks in the format, they don't tend to adapt down as much because they don't generally need to, right? They are generally the more powerful strategies. So I think what's going to be interesting is actually how Kano adapts to Gravy as well. So I agree. I think, you know, for sure, Gravy will do some adapting to Kano. We obviously saw, and I think they'll do that by way of adapting to, I guess, probably just by practicing against Verdance and understanding the Wizard matchup. But the Kano versus Verdance, Kano as opposed to Verdance is very different. And so I think it'll be quite interesting to see as well how Kanos adapt to Gravy and where the Gravy strategies land as well. Because we still don't know exactly what the prevailing strategies from Gravy are going to be. Is it more like we saw from Brody with these 9 tipples? Is it going to be people do find a way to make heavier ally builds work? Is it going to be more like what Yuki posted on the Fab TCG website with this more aggressive leaning shell? So there's lots of things to work out at Gravy. And then I think once that happens through National Season, then I'll be keeping an eye out to see how those next group of decks start to adapt to the prevailing Gravy strategies.
Mm-hmm. All right. Should we move on and talk about... Oh, one more. Yeah.
I want to talk quickly, because this will lead us nicely into top 8. I want to talk quickly about Kasai and Vincent, who both had 30% conversion rates from day 1 to day 2, albeit on small sample sizes. But Vincent put 2 copies of the hero into top 8 with our players... I think Federico from Italy, and also I can't see this on my screenshot, a Greek player, but I can't see the name.
Exilius?
Okay. Yep. There you go. So 2 copies of Verdance in the top 8.
Siskopoulos. I definitely pronounced that wrongly. I'm so sorry.
Siskopoulos? I'm going to say Siskopoulos, but I don't know. Mm-hmm. Yeah, what do you think about Kasai and particularly Vincent, right? After a really tough US Nationals for Vincent, I think one of the worst win rates across Clash Constructor format.
Yeah, I'm hesitant to read too much into it. I think, to be honest, when there's all this representation across like so many different formats, there was one event where she did well. I'm not entirely sure if it's indicative of a trend. For me, it's in an outlier of like a data set for now where you don't pay too much attention to it. Maybe I'm wrong. I'd like to be wrong, but that's my response to like the 2 Vincents in top 8.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think what I find with Vincent is that when that deck runs hot, it runs hot. I think this is the shadow. I've spoken about this before, the shadow dilemma. When these decks run hot, they run hot. But when players play in certain ways into you, you have to run hot, because if you just play well, sometimes you will just lose to your deck. And I think that is kind of my challenge when I look at results with like a Vincent or a Levi, where I'm like, okay, have people found something that I just don't know about or haven't seen yet? Or was it just, a good player playing a deck that had its day? That's kind of what I think. And so I think probably 2, solid players here have put themselves into top 8 on their heroes that they probably know inside and out, or at least probably have played quite a bit of, and had a good day on the hero, on the shadow hero. That's probably more what I would conclude personally.
Yeah. Kasai is interesting because I wouldn't say the Verdance and Florian matchups are amazing.
No.
And like yeah. And the new matchup is good though, and like this obviously new was still legal here. And Azalea is fine as well. So and Gravy also, if they're on a heavier ally list, then Gravy is also like pretty like honestly might even be good for Kasai because you sort of farm currency. You farm currency off the allies. So yeah, I mean I think that could explain it. Where I mean, there's an assassin up there, right? Like you're that's a matchup you want to see. She's there actively trying to farm people who are trying to take new for their last hurrah.
Yeah,
and anyone who's trying to brew with Gravy as well, she's casually good into.
So the top 8 was a Gravy, which finished top Swiss from Marco there. There was the 2 Vincents, like we spoke about. There was two Syndra, a Prism, the Nu, and the Azalea. So Nu obviously ultimately winning the event, but 2 Syndras, like we spoke about, having a good weekend. The 2 Vincents, their Gravy as well, putting one into top 8 and getting to the semifinals. And then Azalea as well. So one Azalea, despite the tougher weekend. Stefano, who's very much an Azalea main, throwing through a couple of calling top 8s now, I think, on that hero. But yeah, quite an interesting spread of top 8. I think the notables, of course, right, is no Verdance, no Florian, so no Earth in that top 8, I think is pretty interesting. And probably, yeah, those are probably the most interesting parts for me, I think, in terms of what their spread ended up being in top 8.
I think 2 Syndras making it up there after the atrocious US Nationals was surprising to me. Like that was one that stuck out to me the most. I think was probably the one that gave the most indication that the meta is shifting.
Yeah, I guess what I'm getting to now is that from what we've seen over this particular past weekend, with things starting to shape up a little more, is that now I think we're starting to see some reality, right? I think Gravy clearly is a reality as one of the better decks in the format. I think Azalea is still a thing, and until it hits Living Legend is still going to be a presence that people are going to flip between in terms of a default aggro deck. But what we've learned between US Nationals to this past weekend is Syndra is certainly going to be a player, and I think going to be more viable than ever this coming weekend than as opposed to the last 2 weekends. I think those are the things I'm taking away from this event, the meta breakdown and the top 8 that we see here. And Prism. Prism being real.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to start talking about something that... Okay, I'm going to say now. Yeah, if Syndra is going to come up and people think like that is the counter to Gravy, I mean, I think Dawnblade Dory actually starts to look more attractive as well. Because as Earth goes down and as Gravy goes up and Syndra goes up as well, I think your Dawnblade Dory stocks actually get pretty decent because you're like fine. You're actually good into like both those decks.
Yeah, makes sense.
And so I do wonder whether there's something there. But you do need Earth to go away. You do need the Florian players to accept that Gravy is a bad matchup and stop bringing that deck. And then
what about Verdance though?
I mean, I think Verdance Gravy is also a bad matchup. So for the Verdance, so yeah,
I think it's better for Verdance than it is for Florian.
I can agree with that, but it's still not.
Great.
It's still miserable. So
okay, miserable like, even. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, no, that's interesting. I would love to see this format really get tipped on its head and Earth become kind of not that relevant, and instead we start to see things, like Dawnblade Dory, like Syndra, Prism. I think is particularly also very interesting in that similar vein as well. I think I think you called it right, and I'll definitely admit that I was much lower on this impact than you. You were very clear that you thought Gravy was going to, from previous season, right, be a meta warping hero, and I think that looks like what we're going. I haven't seen it play out yet, but I think that looks like the way we're going to head to. It doesn't necessarily say it's going to be the most represented, it's going to win the most nationals, it's going to be the best deck in the format, although it could well be. I think more though, definitely what we're seeing is that it's going to have a big impact on what is represented and what is not represented. It's reminiscent, I guess, of Enigma in some ways to that degree, which I know you spoke about in previous weeks. It's reminiscent to Ultim in some ways and Icelander in terms of the way they both had those impacts on the format, even if they weren't necessarily the best decks in the format at any given time.
I think it might very potentially shake out that he does just end up being the best deck in format. Because right now we're talking about decks, like bringing decks to combat him. And then eventually, those are the decks that people are bringing to combat him. I think he has the tools to adapt.
Sure. Yeah.
So like for now, they might be countering it, and then once he adapts back, just like how the Enigmas adapted, just like how the Jormais adapted to whatever was quote unquote countering them, and then they just came out on top anyway. I think that's where he's gonna end up. So we'll have to see if something comes up that can truly like just counter him, no matter how he tries to adapt back. And it honestly, it might be in just a very a linear aggro deck form. Like I think a warrior could potentially be it, honestly. But we'll have to see.
So what benefits from
Acilio? Actually,
Acilio,
Acilio,
yes.
I think is one of those where like, that's actually could very well. It's like sort of like the Aurora-esque, but also deals like 10 arcane, and it's like, wait, how did this happen? I mean, and also he did get an upgrade, which I think maybe is flying a little bit under the radar, but consigned to Cosmos Shock. The 0-cost Shock has been massive for the deck. The deck does some dirty, disgusting things now.
Yeah, Acilio didn't have it almost put a copy into top 8 at US Nationals, so it had a pretty reasonable run. It was only 10 copies, so like the 14th most played deck or something at Bologna last weekend, 2 into day 2.
So also Nu was still legal, and Nu was a very bad matchup for Acilio. So with Nu gone as well, I think that is a reason. There's a significant bump to Acilio.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. What does it mean with Nu gone? What are the heroes that are getting a bump, and what are the heroes that maybe are actually suffering from Nu leaving?
So I do want to frame this. It might be tempting to look at Nu going in a vacuum, but I do think we should contextualize it with Nu is gone, but Gravy is also propping up, is coming up, and I think we have to look at both of those together. So Nu gone,
and Syndra, so we're seeing the rise of Syndra as well.
Yeah, so Nu gone, it's like ostensibly you're like, ooh, okay, Guardian is back in, but then Guardians have a very real question of whether they can they deal with Gravy, and I think there's interplay, right? Nu gone means that the Guardians now can play Rouse the Ancients, Zealous Beltings, and play their big blues again, play their go against stuff. And so does that help the Gravy matchup? Potentially enough where you can actually play the game. I'm not entirely sure if I could see them being favored, but I could see them coming to the point where it's not lunch. It's not like Enigma Guardian where it was actually go get lunch. Like maybe you can get there, and then suddenly Guardian actually becomes a play in the meta, which hasn't been for a while.
Mm-hmm. What about our Earth heroes? They're kind of losing. Seems for Florian, it seems particularly bad, right? You're losing a matchup that I guess it definitely got worse post Gemini, like you said, but it was still, I think, I would say a good matchup for you. And then Gravy's Rising, which is a terrible matchup for you. Verdant's Nu was bad for you, so it's good that Nu's leaving. But then on the flip side, Gravy rising up feels like Florian goes down and Verdant's maybe stays somewhere around the same, maybe slightly down.
But if Florian's also going down, that's also not great for Verdant's.
Yeah, true.
That's one of your good matchups. That's like one of the reasons to bring Verdant's to US Nationals was everyone's going to be playing Florian, and that was very good. And also, if Prism is coming up to combat like Gravy, I think at that point we are sort of going down a couple of tiers. We're going like, the tier 2 response or whatever. But if that is a thing that's rising,
no,
I don't think Prism, a little bit of rise of Prism.
Yeah, I don't think Prism is going down a secondary route at all. I think Prism is US Nationals. Andrew Cook took Prism again to another top 8. We saw Botta, I think Romanian player, this past weekend in Bologna as well, top 8 with Prism, and had a fairly solid weekend as well. When you look at conversion from day 2, was a pretty well represented deck as well, 6th most represented. I think Prism is I think the matchup spread for Prism looks pretty solid.
Exactly. So I think Verdant's overall goes down, despite Nu leaving, which is a miserable matchup. I think overall it goes down again in the context of Gravy coming up and what's happening around that.
Anything else you want to talk about from Nu's impact?
Warrior, I'm talking about Warrior, which is sort of, it feels like it's the reverse. Like we talk about Verdant's, like Verdant's lost a matchup which is bad for her, but is still falling down in terms of meta sort of power because Gravy's coming up, and Warrior's like the reverse, where Warrior lost a matchup that was very good for it in Nu, at least like two-handed Warrior, not on-blade Warrior, like two-handed Warrior was like very happy to play into Nu, but they might have gotten better if people are playing a lot of Gravy, which is very, very interesting.
What's the Prism matchup like for Warrior? And the Syndrome matchup?
I need to it's I think Syndra is probably a game to be played because you are happy to like block out their mask and then like Dynamo value them and take it along. Prism is not good, at least like from the Kasai side, it wasn't good. But then again, a lot of my experience in a Prism matchup comes from when Tome of Divinity was still around.
Very different
and with
times.
that gone, I haven't revisited it. And I wonder whether I'm still probably not going to be happy playing a Prism as a warrior because ALS is just there's nothing the warrior can do that beats ALS. Like in a sense, like they just have that always. But they're also like warriors are also good at just blocking out the heralds for like quite a while. So it'll be interesting to revisit. Probably not great, but I think Gravy is like, it looks, at least so far, at least the current state of things, seems like your two-handed warriors are like pretty alright into Gravy.
Nice. Okay, I want to do a bit of a check-in as we head to wrapping up this pod, but also to our first week of national season and just a bit of a snapshot of the meta. What do we think the meta looks like for this coming weekend as we head to national season? What are the top decks? What are the decks that are going to be most represented? Not necessarily saying what's the best deck, although I think that we've had a bit of a conversation about the strongest decks. What are the most represented? What are the strongest picks for this coming weekend, do you think, and for beyond?
I think for me, it's Gravy. Gravy's up there as I think currently best deck in format until I see something that's like a little bit more convincing. I'll put that as like my top. Where would you put? What would you put up there?
I don't know what the top deck is, honestly. I think it is. I think actually it is Gravy, but not because I think it's necessarily the strongest. I just think it's by default. Like I think it has a very powerful like plan, and people need to understand. People need to work out what it is, and then try and actually adapt to it. Whether they can or not, we'll see, right? But I think it just default puts itself in a very good position because it's a new, somewhat unknown quantity. It does something that has board presence that's powerful, and that forces people to interact with it. And if they can't, then it can snowball games, right? So I think for me, the top decks going into this weekend are Gravy, Verdance, Syndra, and Prism, I think. And then followed by Florian and Azalea. I think that's the meta for me at the moment, I think. And then there's some outliers in the form of your warriors, which I think can quickly rise up, like you say, Kano and Acilio. Anything else? I'm not convinced on. I don't think the assassins are good.
Jarl. I think Jarl
maybe
could be something there.
Maybe
that is something because I think of the like slow-ish decks, I think he potentially has. I don't say the most reasonable. I don't know. There is a vision. There's the beginnings of a vision I could see where actually when you blow up Gravy's compass, it actually does make things pretty like awkward and like difficult for the Gravy.
Yeah. And
Jarl does have access to that, and obviously, and now he'll also get access to better blues where he was very restricted on blues with New Gone as well. So I don't think we have ever seen Jarl in like a fully formed version because of how neutered they had to make the deck to not auto lose to New, right? But now with that gone, I think we might be seeing a bunch of Earth, Ice, Guardian stuff going around because, like in terms of he's an Earth Ice Guardian. He's got Stalagmite as well. He's got a really good Fridge. He's got good defenses, and he's got very good disruption.
He does
as well. Like recently, I've been seeing more like Oakenfold come into my life again, and I was like, wait, I forgot how absolutely insane this card was. It's so good. And he can blow up the compasses. He can play aggressive go again cards now again. I think he was on my watch list basically as like potentially something that's like coming up.
I'm on board. I mean, I spent a lot of time playing Jarl before Pro Tour London, and I was I was enjoying my Jarl games a lot, but I think, the fact that Enigma and New existed.
Exactly. So, yeah, New existed means you couldn't play the cards you wanted to play to even game into Enigma.
You could just give up the New matchup, but it wasn't good enough. Yeah. It didn't make your Enigma matchup good enough that it was worth doing.
Yeah, so you choose, are you giving up New completely or are you giving up Enigma completely? And it's like, and even when you do those things, not like the other matchup got that much better, where it was like worth it. So
yeah, exactly.
Right, like even like when you're like playing your not good blue attacks, it's not like the New matchup was free. It was still very much a game for both sides.
Exactly.
So yeah, but now we get to see him like fully formed. And we have to see whether he can do anything with that. Because you think about Prism has a guardian problem. Ever since Tome of Divinity's left, she's had a very strict guardian problem, which was being held down by the fact that Noon still existed.
Yeah.
So Victor couldn't play, and Jarls couldn't play the blues that Prism's scared of. Now, though, they can. So it's like when Jarl comes up with Macho Grandes and Thunderquakes and Glacial Footsteps, I don't know what Prism's going to do. And if this add one time skippers in, it's I'm not entirely sure what Prism can do against that. I do believe that's almost a deterministic loss for the Prism. And then Jarl has some very, very strong plays. Winter's Bite, when you don't have when one of your equipment's already blown up or you had to use it or something, is actually disgusting. When you get a Frostbite and you had to pitch a card or something, he's got some strong stuff. And then on top of that, he has Stalagmite and Oaken Old. So
yeah.
Very much on my watch list.
I agree. I think as well, if you look at the results of Victor over the past weekend, I think there is something to Guardian. So I think, I omitted that from my list actually, but it's a very good call. I could see a world where actually, especially if even Victor, right? If it's okay, Prism and Syndra are two of the four most represented decks in the format, and you can put enough pressure on Gravy. I'm not saying you can. You work it out, and it turns out you can put enough pressure on Gravy, and you kind of shut down, if the prevailing versions of these more aggressive versions, you can shut down their value of their aggressiveness through your block cards and your gold value, your hero ability. Then I can see a world where Victor, or to your point, Jarl, from all things you said, are one of the 5 best decks in the format, and all of a sudden it's don't worry about Azalea. It turns out Azalea is not good at all, which actually could be a very real case as well. I just think it has a lot of raw power, so people will continue to play it, and it'll some point just sneak into Living Legend. Maybe, probably, but I think that is very real, and then I think that is good for Verdance if that is the case, right? So,
which is. Again, I think part of we're talking about Victor and Jarl potentially being players. It's also in the context of Verdance and Florian going down,
massively,
having a bit of a downtrend. But then, but if the Earth Heroes are still around, or if they pick back up because people are playing Guardian again, then suddenly there is that sort of ebb and flow happening there, the push and pull.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to me, it's I feel like I'm just treading water a little bit until we get to this first week in Nationals, and I have a little bit more to go on for Classic Constructed. But there's some decks that I'm particularly interested in, and I need a little bit more sort of understanding, a little bit more ground under my feet to make some decisions. But once I do, I think I'm going to enjoy working out what deck I'm going to play for Singapore. Because right now, I honestly have zero clue what I will play for Singapore. I think that I have no more than 15% confidence of playing a hero right now. So it's pretty low.
I'm calling it. I think you're playing Gravy for Singapore.
Oh, really?
That's my prediction right now.
All right, sure.
I think it's right up your alley. I think it has the strength that you want, the consistency that you want, and the whole micro decision-making sort of stuff that you
I think that's true. I think it's true. I could see myself playing Gravy. It's definitely in my warehouse, something that the type of heroes I like to play. Although
he's also broken, and so you definitely will
there we go. There it
is. You did play Dromai and Enigma, and I'm kind of Gravy is the new Dromai / Enigma, so there you go. It's right up your alley.
Did I play Dromai when it wasn't even good? I don't know what you're talking about.
You played Dromai at... What do you mean it wasn't good? What?
Yeah,
you played Dromai Barcelona. She was good at Barcelona.
Oh, yeah. I did play Dromai Barcelona. I kind of regret that. That was a last-minute switch. That's not what I was planning to play. But I played Dromai. I top 4 my Nationals that year with Dromai when it wasn't particularly good. So there you go. I remember posting, before round 1 on Twitter or X, whatever, picture of my deck box in Dromai, and people were like, wait, what? People were very surprised I was playing Dromai, I think. There you go.
So I'm calling that you're playing Gravy
we'll see.
for Singapore, and we'll see if that happens.
Sure. All right, that is episode 218 of Arsenal Pass. Goodbye, new. Hello, national season. Excited to see what happens this weekend. I'll be tuning into at least the Canadian Nationals, potentially others. If others are being streamed, I'll be keeping an eye out for that. Definitely, if you're looking for streams, check out, I guess, probably your social media presence. Discord's probably a good place to find streams as well. But Canada is up on the Fab TCG YouTube channel to go check that out. I don't know who's casting that. Do you know who's casting that?
That's a great question. I feel like I knew. I feel like it was told to me at some point, and I don't remember off the top of my head.
Okay. Well, we'll find out this coming weekend, I guess. But until next week, thank you to all the Arsenal Pass patrons, and we will see you in the next episode.